Thank you to all of our speakers. Minister English is on a tight schedule and is already over his allotted time, but he has indicated he's happy to take a couple of questions. So I'm going to do that first, if there are any, and then the Deputy Prime Minister can leave if he wishes. Are there any questions? Stunned silence. Barry.
Minister, how do you deal with the differing views put out perhaps by some of your political opponents about this situation? The message I've heard today is actually being rebuked or disputed in the media.
Oh, look, I wouldn't take too much notice of it if I was you, because they're probably wrong. No, look, I think one of the surprising things about this is that the degree to which the consensus has moved over the last 4 or 5 years. You know, that causes arguments over whether there's too many Chinese buyers or whatever. But I think most people know that's probably at the margin. And the key issues are pretty well understood. The challenge for all of us is execution on a scale that's meaningful and at a speed that's meaningful both politically, but also for the households who deal with, you know, the negative externalities about it, and reassuring ourselves that, you know, I think everyone believes, almost everyone believes, that New Zealand can have more affordable housing. We don't need to be the second most expensive. For whatever measure you use, we're up there. There's plenty of room. There's only 4.5 million of us, you know. It's just a matter of how we get there.
Any other questions?
I've got a quick one. Are all the houses in Dipton Auckland built?
Yeah, most of them, I think. They're very affordable. I can see where it comes from. They're very affordable. But you know, this comes down to we have this structure. I mean, the serious issue in here is we have a planning structure that enables quite high levels of discretion. In my view, quite a lot of that, some of that discretion is probably ultra vires. But if you're the developer, you've got to go with it, right? And when you start, you know, we can have hopefully we can have the debate as Penny suggested about some of these things. But what we see as we get a bit of an overview is across the country, some planning processes that are getting incredibly prescriptive, for instance, about what happens inside apartments. Well, why the hell are we worried about that? Because what we know is that if you're making these decisions, you have to do it in the context of the economic trade-offs. And part of the process ahead of us, I think, is making those trade-offs visible. So if we want to, you know, contain beautiful cities, well, that's fine. But you can want that as long as you know that it's going to cost the household another $100 a week in rent, and the taxpayer is going to pay half it. Okay, it's going to, you know, this decision here to have a nice apartment block is going to cost every taxpayer in New Zealand a contribution of $50 a week rent. That's an avoidable cost. And so the good thing that's happening now is we're getting into a process where some of that stuff's coming to the surface, like the impact of land constraint on the margins of cities. It has an impact on all land prices across that city, which has an impact on the interest rate structure, which has an impact on my household 1,500 kilometres away. So that's what's so good about this discussion, is that stuff's coming to the surface. So we need to be the aspect at a general level. What's missing from our planning process is this is a 20-year history of this, almost a willful neglect of cost and economics. Okay, and I know some people regard those as nasty right-wing concepts, but real people pay real rent and real interest rates based on decisions made by planners using discretion, which is unaccountable. That's at its worst. You know, at its best, we get what we want and it looks great and we're all happy. And sometimes that happens.
It's a very debatable point to leave on. But anyway, thank you, Minister English. Look, there are, I'm sure, other questions of Penny, particularly John and Arthur. Are there any questions? There must be some. Yes.
A lot of the discussion today has been about, particularly about land supply, affordability issues where there's not many constraints on your boundaries. Wellington, we've got a geography, it's not flat earth, it's really, it's forced compactness. How do we deal with it here?
Auckland is the same. We're the narrowest part of New Zealand, basically, when you're in Auckland, with the biggest city. So we've got physical constraints as well. We also have, areas that are no-go areas, our very sensitive environmental areas that we won't spread into. So we're all dealing with those challenges. The way that we're endeavouring to deal with it in Auckland is to understand the topography and the geography of the area, to be very clear about what those greenfield growth areas are going to be, and to have a sensible rationale behind them. And Arthur probably won't agree with me, but we fundamentally need to address the issue that spread isn't all about economic rationale. Spread is actually a really expensive choice because that infrastructure in the ground costs money, and we do need to actually sensibly plan infrastructure ahead of release. I'm sorry the Minister's not here because it feels a little bit like challenging some of that while he's not here to address it. So, physical constraints, infrastructure constraints, environmental constraints, as well as in Auckland, the physical constraint leads to huge transport problems. So we need a very sensibly planned transport system that addresses those physical constraints. And again, big sunk costs in those infrastructure investments need to be recouped by building a truckload of stuff around them rather than spreading and spreading and spreading.
Yeah, just to build on what Penny said, I think there's two aspects, really. One is make sure there's not unnecessary impediments to going up, because in some cities, Auckland in particular, there are very severe height limits as well as expansion limits outwards. So there's a vertical urban limit as well as a horizontal urban limit, and the political economy, unfortunately, seems to make that an incredibly difficult one to get round. I mean, I was brought up, for instance, in Kohimarama for part of the time. That should, in any other place in the world, that would all be 20-storey apartments, right? And it should be.
Tell them that.
And it should be. I do tell them that, and I'm not welcome back. But it's but it's obvious that St Heliers, Mission Bay, Kohimarama, all these places should be 20-storey apartments. They should, Oriental Bay, and we've done a better job of it in Wellington than Auckland has in terms of allowing that, but still not as good a job, I think, as we could. The second one is to make sure that where there is land that's potentially available, that you have a really good transport system out to that land. So, and again, Wellington's a little bit luckier than Auckland in that way because we've built around two valleys. We've managed to build a transport system around those two valleys. So there's plenty of room still to expand in the Kapiti Coast. If you could find the water, and but so that's where you have to integrate the infrastructure, as John was talking about, implied with the planning side.
Yes. Yeah.
I'm curious about Arthur's views on the release of land in Auckland, specifically when you look at the greenfields areas proposed. They're proposed on quite far areas outside of Auckland, Warkworth and Pukekohe. Does that materially have an impact on this, as opposed to, say, contiguous land along the former mold?
Again, in my view, where it's being opened up should be near where existing transport links are. I think there's still this huge gap, and I haven't looked at the latest things, but this huge gap on the northern motorway between Albany and Whangaparoa Peninsula, which just doesn't make any sense to me. I understand there are some engineering issues there, but there's an awful lot of green, flattish sort of land there. To Wellingtonian, it's extraordinarily flat. One would have to think you've got a northern motorway there. You can build, you can extend the busways up there really cheaply. That would be the obvious place to extend, in my view. I just think we need to think better about the infrastructure and land opening up than we have done.
Any other questions? Okay, look, I'm going to bring this to a close. I want to thank you all for coming. To Penny, John and Arthur, thank you. And can I pass on thanks to Minister English, Matt, as well, for the contribution that has been made to this evening. It is a challenging subject, and even for us, it has been far more involved, what we know now compared with what we knew 2 or 3 years ago when it was first raised with us. And pretty much it was raised with us on the basis, look, there's not enough land available, the development contributions are too high. That was pretty much how it was raised. And then when everybody started having a look at it, we realised it was completely multifaceted. And it was all about demographic change, it was all about constraints, it was all about people's preferences, building materials, you name it. It was all in there. So I just want to thank you for coming because this is an area that local government is going to continue to work on. And there are mayors, Ross, you haven't been acknowledged yet, but I'm going to do that. Ross Patterson from Western Bay, as well as Julie, because it's vital. It's of vital interest to particularly the northern part of New Zealand. You know, there is vital interest. And Penny, as you've worked through your issue, and it's been quite, you know, there's been some interesting political dynamics play out here as we've ended up in this space. I don't doubt everybody's motivation, and Minister English's overarching commentary is, you know, in general, pretty sound. I didn't agree with the last bit he said, but apart from that, it's pretty hard to fault it. So we do have to effectively sort this out together, and that's really what tonight's about. And most important to us, it's about thinking strategically, all of us, as we work on the big issues which have been identified by the speakers. And we also see in Local Government New Zealand that actually regional development and a strategy around that holistically for New Zealand is also a fundamental factor in the success. So can I thank you all for coming, invite you to stay for some more refreshments, and look forward to seeing you again at a future occasion such as this. Thank you very much.